We'll do it again soon. It's a good one. All my days I will sing this song of gladness. Give me praise to the fountain of delight. For in my helplessness you heard my cry, and waves of
All right. Well, there was an interesting one. All right. Good evening. Wow. Thank you, worship team. Thank you for the songs you picked. I say this periodically. You may not be completely tired of hearing it yet, but you know what? I feel sorry for people that don't get to just sit around in a group with their friends and sing about God. Wow, folks, you have no, I don't know, maybe you realize how amazing that is and what a privilege that is. After preaching this morning and then knowing that I've got a lot of talking to do tonight, I finally had to back off on the last song because I realized, oh yeah, my voice is already starting to get tired and we've got some talking to do. So I backed off a little bit, but man, I hated to. I love getting together and singing with the church. Folks, thank you for doing that for us, for helping us and leading us in that. It is a fantastic time. Now, that being said, I want full understanding that this morning's message went a little short, which means I bought myself some extra time for tonight. All right? That's how that works. That's how that works. Normally, I run long on Sunday night, and anyhow. So we have been reading about a missionary by the name of David Livingstone. What? David's not here tonight to pick at me, all right? What continent is he working on? Can't call it the country. David called me on that. What continent, Silas? Africa. He is working all over the continent of Africa. What does he just love to get out and do? What is he doing so much of? Misa, sorry. Traveling, exploring, finding new areas. Don't feel bad. I messed up my kid's name too, so it's okay. Or if I mess up other kids' names, I don't feel bad. All right. I probably should feel bad about messing my kids' names up, but I don't. So David Livingstone is all focused. He's always going, exploring new areas. Does anybody remember what is he ultimately looking for? He keeps exploring these different rivers. What is he looking for? Does anybody remember what his desire, what his drive is? Mo? Okay, he is looking for a water route from the coast to the central areas, the central part of the continent of Africa, because right now, inland travel from the coast to the inland of the nation is very time-consuming and not safe, basically. So he's looking for that inland water route so that he can get missionaries in. Now, the last time we saw, he had actually gone back to Britain and reported back, wrote a book, raised some money, got some things done, and he goes back from England, headed back to the continent of Africa. As he goes back, what was he taking with him as he went? Does anybody remember what it was he was taking with him? Elijah. A boat in pieces, and specifically it was a steamboat in pieces that he was going to put back together. Did it work well? The boat that he took back with him. Isaiah. No, it did not. Days and days spent cutting wood to feed it, and then it would get tangled up, and the draft wasn't shallow enough, and he had all kinds of trouble. Now, what African problem is David trying the hardest to change. There's a problem going on in Africa that David is focused on stopping, changing. What is that? Does anybody know? Does anybody remember? No, not the sickness. Slave trade. The slave trade. He sees the slave trade going on, and he keeps saying, if we can get commerce in, and that will shine a light, and people will see what's going on with the slave trade. He's trying to get that stopped. Okay? Now, since the first boat didn't work, what did he do? Does anybody remember what he did? Sam? He designed his own, had it built, and it worked. Does anybody remember the name of the boat? Nice try. Nice try. Very close. Actually, really cool, fascinating lead-in for where we're going to be tonight. He's going to do something SS Minnow-like with his boat. The name of the boat was actually Nyassa, after a lake he was looking for. Okay? He made that. Now, what sad, painful event happened at the end of our last chapter that we read? Does anybody remember? Maisie? Well, no, significantly more sad than that. I mean, it's a terrible way to say it. She's over here whispering it. Mo, can you borrow the answer from her? His wife died. Oh, he borrowed, okay, well, or maybe he came up with it all on his own. All right, at the end of our last chapter, we read David Livingstone's wife, Mary, died. She came in contact with malaria. It was the first time she'd ever had malaria, and it just wiped her out. So at the end of the last book, David's wife passes there in Africa with him. Now, he's got his boat. He still has one guy left who had gone with him on this original, yeah. He has, okay, I'm trying to think if that explains that here in a minute. He has none of his children with him. When his wife got sick, the last two children ended up at one of the mission stations, which name I just lost. But they ended up at one of the mission stations. And so, no, the children are not with him at this point. It's just, well, now him by himself. His brother had gone with him as the original group that were going to take the steamboat down the river, and they ran into the rapids and couldn't get anywhere and all of that. Okay? The other crew members were accusing David's brother of being useless, yes. Well, he did admit it eventually, yes. But anyhow, we don't need to hammer on that point, okay? Now, all right, so let's pick up where we're at now. India, gasped George Ray. You can't be serious, Livingstone. You're going to sail the Lady Nyassa to India? Whatever would make you want to go on such a suicide trip? David looked at his old friend. George Ray was the last man still with him from the group who'd come to Africa 6 years before to help explore the Zambezi River. I need to go home, he said. The 2 years since Mary died have not been easy. I need to see my children again. Little Anna Mary is 5 now, and I've never even seen her. And now that I've explored 500 miles up the Rovuma, not Roomba. That slipped out. Rovuma, the Rovuma River, I need to go and report that it's too shallow for a steamboat to navigate. Yes, I understand that. all that, and quite right, too. It's a good thing to regroup in Scotland. But what does that have to do with sailing the Lady Nyassa to India? Pressed George Ray. Okay. David smiled wearily. I've spent my life trying to find ways to stop the slave trade, and I will not leave my boat in Africa where it can fall into the hands of slave traders and be used to further their evil practices. Besides, I paid for it with my money from my book, and I've been thinking I might sell it and use the money for the 2 youngest children's education. I'm sure I can find someone in India who would use it for a good purpose. But you'll never make it to India, blurted George Ray. You can't be thinking straight. India is 2,500 miles away. There's monsoons in that part of the world. The Lady Nyassa is a river boat, not an ocean-going vessel. She's only 40 feet long from stem to stern and doesn't have sails. Only a tiny little steam engine. You're insane. She'll break apart at the first big wave, and you'll all be drowned. I take it you're not coming with me then, asked David dryly. I'd follow you to the ends of the earth, but not to the bottom of the ocean, George Ray replied. Be reasonable for once, David. This scheme of yours will not work. However, the Lady Nyassa did set sail for India on April 30th, 1864, with a 12-man crew, with 12 crew members aboard, 3 white men and 9 Africans. None of the men had any ocean sailing experience. 7 of the Africans came from inland villages and had never seen the ocean before. Still, somehow David managed to keep his crew from jumping overboard and sailed the Lady Nyassa up the east coast of Africa to Zanzibar. From there, the boat sailed east to Bombay, India, arriving June 13th, 1864. So, what does David want to do? Sail his little boat to India. Now, why is it that David wants to take his boat with him? Elijah? Exactly. He does not. It's a good riverboat, and he doesn't want the slave traders to get use of it. So, did he make it to India? Yes, he made it. Somehow in a 40-foot, flat-bottom riverboat across the ocean. I don't understand it. But, well, let me rephrase that. There is one way for that to happen. God said, I'm going to float your little boat across the ocean. And God floated his little boat over to India. So, what happens next? All right. So, in Bombay, no one was expecting a small riverboat from Africa, and no welcoming committee was waiting. However, David was viewed as a hero throughout the British Empire, and once he was able to convince the port authorities that he really had sailed all the way from Africa, he was given an official welcome. He even had an audience with Sir Bartle Frere, the governor of Bombay. Sir Bartle Frere was captivated by David's efforts to end slave trading and offered to help in any way he could. However, he could not recommend a buyer for the Lady Nyassa. So David left the boat in the care of a British naval officer. He found a new home in Bombay for his African crew and caught a ship bound for England. David arrived in London on June 23, 1864, and much to his surprise, he received a hero's welcome. His first night home, he was swept off to a reception at the Prime Minister Palmerston's home. For the rest of the week, he kept busy with appointments to see the Foreign Secretary and other important government officials. By the end of the week, David was anxious for all the formalities to be over so he could visit his family. Once in Scotland, the reunion with his family was a mixture of joy and sadness. His 80-year-old mother was now senile and didn't recognize him. His two sisters, Janet and Agnes, were overworked taking care of their mother and raising his children, especially since Zalga and Anna had been sent to Scotland from Cwrman. So the youngest kids had been left in Cwrman, and they've been sent to Scotland now. That was Sam was asking about whether the kids are with him. Or Nick was asking. Nick was asking? Oh, well, Nick was asking about the kids, not Sam. I don't know. All right. Much to David's dismay, his 18-year-old son, Robert, had gone off to Africa in search of him. When he couldn't locate David, he drifted on to the United States, where he'd enlisted in the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. The whole family waited nervously to hear for news from him. Meanwhile, 15-year-old Thomas was ill with kidney disease. David knew it was a serious condition and worried about his son's recovery. The other three children, 17-year-old Agnes, 12-year-old Zalga, and 5-year-old Anna, all seemed to be well, though Anna was very shy around the father she had not previously met. While in Scotland, David began writing a second book entitled The Narrative of an Expedition to Zambezi and its Tributaries. He also gave lectures on how Africa needed to be opened up to commerce and how the slave trade needed to be stopped. Since his official duties exploring and mapping the Zambezi River area were now complete, the British government gave David £500 to return to Africa and look for ways to end the slave trade. The Royal Geographical Society also gave him £500. As well, James Young, David's old friend from his days at Anderson College, gave David another £1,000. James Young had made a fortune inventing paraffin oil, which was used widely in lamps because it was so clean burning. In August 1865, David Livingstone left England for the last time. As he left, his heart was heavy. His mother had died during his time at home, and just before boarding the ship, he received news that his oldest son, Robert, had died in a prisoner of war camp in North Carolina. The ship took David back to Bombay so that he could sell the Lady Nyasa and collect his crew and take them back to Africa. In Bombay, Sir Bartle Frere took an active interest in David's work and raised £1,000 to help pay for David's next expedition. David also found a buyer for the Lady Nyasa, though he only got £2,300 for it. This was much less than it was worth, but as it turned out, it did not matter. David put the money in a bank in Bombay, planning to send it to Scotland later to pay for Zalga and Anna's education. Within weeks of depositing the money, however, the banks in India failed, and David lost every penny he'd received for the boat. Besides giving David the £1,000, Sir Bartle Frere offered David and his men a free trip to Zanzibar aboard the Thule, a steamship he was sending as a gift to the Sultan of Zanzibar. In Zanzibar, David was reunited with Dr. Kirk, who is now the British consul there, and apparently probably surprised that David had survived the trip to India. All right, now, let's see. He gets back to England, and I'm reading larger sections because we're trying to finish up the book tonight. So this may sound strange. Does David intend to stay in England? No. He makes it back to England, he reports, and then he turns around. What is it that the British government has actually hired him to do? What do they say they want him to do this time? Sam? Oh, he forgot. Okay. Okay. All right, Mo? Yeah. Look for ways to stop the slave trade. So he is going back specifically. His heart is still in what he's doing, and the British government is like, yeah, if you can find a way to stop the slave trade, see what you can figure out. So he goes back to do that. Lots of terrible things, honestly, have happened to the guy. Look, think about it. David Livingstone, he's now lost his wife, his oldest son, his mother. His father had passed several years before. Doesn't know his kids very well. Lots of things are really kind of piling up. He is still dealing with all kinds of health problems from the diseases he's picked up. I don't know if anybody knows or realizes, he's mentioned it a few times. Once you contract malaria, it never entirely goes away. It goes dormant and it comes back up every once in a while and says, hey, by the way, I'm here. Okay? So he's still battling with all of those things. So he doesn't decide to stay in England. He says, nope, I'm going back. So he goes back. Now, let's pick up and keep reading. Like I said, we're reading some bigger chunks because we are finishing the book tonight. So, from Zanzibar, David caught another ship down the coast of Mikindani at the mouth of the Rovuma. That's a V. Rovuma River. I cannot say that one. In Mikindani, David hired a fresh group of men to go with him on his next expedition. Among them were Susi and Chuma, two ex-slaves whom David had freed. These two men proved to be faithful helpers, but David did not have the same experience with his choice of other helpers. Many of the men of his expedition deserted him, and on January 20th, 1867, two men fled with David's most important possession, his medicine box. David knew it was only a matter of time before he came down with another bout of malaria or dysentery, which, without medicines he knew, could kill him. Still, stubborn as he was, he chose to keep going. What he did not know was that the two men were cunning enough to return to Mikindani and report David Livingstone's death so they could receive their wages. They offered David's medicine box as proof of his death. No one knew for sure whether their story was true. Was the great explorer really dead, or was he still slogging on through the bush somewhere? A search party was organized, and although it did not catch up with David, its members became convinced that he was still alive and still headed inland. And he was. On April 4th, 1867, David arrived at the southern end of Lake Tanganyika. By then, the sickness he feared had caught up with him, and he had to rest for several weeks before going on. He decided to explore the western side of the lake. The sights that awaited him there turned his stomach more than his sickness did. Everywhere there were signs of slave trade. Huts were burned, villages destroyed, and dead bodies strewn along the trails. At one point, David came upon a woman with her 3-year-old son. The child, who was about to be sold into slavery, clung to his mother and wept bitterly. David watched in despair as the boy was handed over in return for 4 yards of fabric. The slave traders in this area were Arabs, and while David despised what they were doing, he recognized that they needed to hear the gospel message. Because of this, he struck up many friendships with the slave traders, often traveling with them. He was always respectful towards them and took every opportunity possible to tell them about the gospel message and how God wanted them to stop their horrible trade. The slave traders, in turn, were kind to David, and without their help, David may well have died from recurring bouts of malaria. For the next 3 years, David Livingstone explored the inland areas. Sometimes he traveled with only 6 helpers. Sometimes he traveled with large groups of Arabs. Wherever he went, he took notes and made maps of everything he saw. In the course of his travels, he discovered 2 more lakes, Banguelo and Moro. Then, in 1870, he heard that he was very close to a river the Africans called Lualaba. It was said that the river was as wide as 20 canoes and very deep, and it flowed north. David wondered whether this could be the upper reaches of the Nile. That would be quite a discovery. If it was the Nile, it would most likely be navigable all the way to Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. The alternative was that Lualaba was part of the Congo River system. If it was, it would be useless as a way to open up the interior of Africa. The Congo River, which flowed into the Atlantic Ocean, was not navigable 75 miles from its mouth because of a series of rapids that stretched inland for hundreds of miles, much like the Zambezi River problem that he found. Of course, there was only one way to discover whether the Lualaba was part of the Congo River or the Nile. David would have to canoe down it and see where it took him. By January 1871, 58-year-old David Livingstone was camped on the banks of the Lualaba River near the village of Ngawe. If he had not been so ill, he would not have spent a day there. It was the worst place he had visited in all of Africa. Not only had the slave traders created havoc in the area, but the people in the village themselves were enthusiastic cannibals. To show how important they were, the men all wore necklaces decorated with human jawbones. David could hardly wait to get well enough to be on his way, and by October, he had found a more hospitable village called Ujiji. Although David was happy to be away from the Ngawe, his life was still filled with concerns. He was too far from the coast to hear news from home or get fresh supplies. By the end of October, he had run out of just about everything. His teeth were shattered and broken from eating the tough local corn, and when his India ink supply ran out, he was forced to crush seeds and make a watery red ink, which he used to write his notes on the edges of old pieces of newspaper. All right. What did the 2 men steal from David before they deserted? Haley? His medicine box. All right, so they steal his medicine box. Why was it that they stole that? They figure out later. Isaiah. To prove that he's dead, yep. It was their proof that he was dead so they could get their paycheck to say they went with him, but he died. All right. How does David treat the Arab slave traders? Zach? Kindly and respectfully. Why? Why does he treat these guys, these horrible guys, this way? Sophia. They need Jesus. He knows that the only way to truly fix this problem is with Jesus. We'll come back to that here in a little bit. All right. What does David run out of? Zach? Silas? Okay, he ran out of paper. He was using old newspapers. Okay. What else? Eli? Literally everything. Yes. It was like just start naming things. He ran out of everything. He's out of food. He's out of medicine. He's out of paper. He's out of ink. He's out of everything. He's mashing up berries to make some weak red ink to write with. All right? So, let's see what happens. David lived in limbo. He was not well enough to go forward with his exploration, and he was far too stubborn to go back. Then, on the morning of November 3rd, 1871, David's faithful helper, Susi, came running into his hut. "Master, master, I see an Englishman. He's like you. He's coming here," Susi said excitedly. David pulled himself up from his cot. "Calm down, Susi. Tell me exactly what you saw." Before Susi had time to explain, David saw for himself. Winding along the dusty trail was a large party of porters, led by a single white man carrying an American flag. The group kept coming until it stopped in front of David. The white man, who seemed to be about half David's age, looked David in the eye and asked, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" Famous quote. David tipped his cap. "Yes," he replied, "and who might you be?" "I am Henry Stanley, Doctor. I have been sent to find you." David laughed. As far as he was concerned, he'd never been lost. "Come and sit down," he said with a flourish, pointing to his tiny hut. David Livingstone and Henry Stanley sat talking for a long time. David had with him the most precious... No, Henry, thank you. Henry had with him the most precious cargo of all, letters from home. As David read them, he learned that his daughter Agnes had married while his son Thomas was alive, though still very sick. And his in-laws, Robert and Mary Moffat, had returned to Scotland to live. There were newspapers, too, that told of huge breakthroughs. The Suez Canal had been opened, connecting the Red Sea with the Mediterranean. Now a person could sail from the east coast of Africa to England without having to travel overland through Egypt. And a railroad now joined the east and west coasts of the United States. After David had read all his mail in the newspapers, Henry Stanley told him the purpose of his visit. He was a newspaper reporter for the New York Herald. David Livingstone had become a legend in America, and everyone wanted to know whether he was alive and what he was up to. Despite being a reporter, Henry Stanley, like David, had a great sense of adventure. It was not long before the two men had decided to explore Lake Tanganyika together. Henry generously shared his provisions and food, the best David had eaten in months. Henry also bought a canoe for the exploration and a donkey for David to ride on. Even so, the pair made slow progress. It took them a month to discover that the water at the northern end ran into the lake, not out of it. It seemed very unlikely that the lake was the source of the Nile River, as David had hoped it would be. David returned to Ujiji, discouraged and ill once again. Henry Stanley stayed with him, nursed him, and helped him, and put his journals into order. Over the next 3 months, Henry did everything he could think of to convince David Livingstone to return to the coast with him. He even offered to go with David to Scotland, where David could get good medical care and see his family. But as appealing as the offer was, David had set himself a goal, and he would find a waterway into the interior of Africa, or he would die trying. All right, what is the job of the man who finds David? What is he? Elijah? He's a reporter. Bank on the reporters to, find somebody. What does David talk this reporter into doing? Very David Livingstone style. All right, Sam? Yes. He comes as a reporter to come find David Livingstone, and David Livingstone convinces him to go on an exploration trip. All right? Now, what is it that David is still determined to do? What is his main plan still? Silas? Yep, find an inland waterway so he can go from the coast into the center of Africa. All right, well, Let's see how this works. Okay. All right. It was 5 months later. It was 5 months after. No, wait. Let me back up. I missed a paragraph. All right. Finally, in May of 1872, Henry Stanley said farewell to his new friend and headed back to the coast. With him, he carried all of David's journals and a large number of letters David had written to friends and family. It would be the last time any white person would see David Livingstone alive. It was 5 months after Henry Stanley had departed before David felt strong enough to take his next trip. This time, he decided to go south along the western shore of Lake Tanganyika. Then he would turn west down the Lualaba River and see where it led. As on David's previous trips, the African wilderness proved filled with unwelcome surprises. David's small party of men found themselves slogging through swamps of waist-deep, thick, black mud. They were also attacked by bees. Menacing lions hungrily stalked their campsites each night. On March 19, 1873, David celebrated his 60th birthday, although it was not a happy occasion. He was now in constant pain and unable to travel for more than 10 hours a week. For someone who had traveled more than 40,000 miles of African wilderness, this was pitifully slow progress, and David found it difficult to accept. But he had no alternative but to accept it. His body was worn and tired. David continued writing in his journal, though even this tired him to the point where most days it took all